Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Warmly welcome to the third panel discussion, which is arranged by Electrical, Electronic and Telecommunication Engineering Sectional Committee in ISL for the session 2023-2024. So this time also we have selected a very important and a useful topic. So we are going to discuss about the restructuring of government enterprises and its economic impact to the country. So we have invited esteemed panelists in order to share their views, ideas, and experience with us. So let me first welcome and introduce them to the audience. We have invited Dr. Indrajit Kumarasamy, the former governor of Central Bank Sri Lanka. So on behalf of ISL and Electrical, Electronic and Telecommunication Sectional Committee, I would like to welcome you, sir. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And then we invited Mr. Suresh Shah, the head of state-owned enterprise restructuring unit. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation, and you are also warmly welcome. This discussion will be moderated by Dr. Susantha Pereira, former CB General Manager and Additional Secretary to Minister of Power and Energy. Thank you, sir, for arranging this program, and you are also warmly welcome. Engineer Professor Ranjit Disanayake, the President of ISL, and all the council members, CEO of ISL, Engineer Neil Abhisekar, you all are warmly welcome on behalf of the sectional committee, and all the past presidents and past council members and the members of Electrical, Electronic and Telecommunication Engineering Sectional Committee and members of all ISL, you all are warmly welcome for this session. And we have specifically invited set of esteemed audience in order to witness this program. So we invited delegates from Minister of Power and Energy, and we invited utilities sections such as CB, SLT, LECO, LTL, and from the regulatory bodies and professional organization, we have invited Public Utility Commission of Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority, Telecommunication Regulatory Commission of Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka Stratton Institute, and Sri Lanka Atomic Energy Board and Sri Lanka Atomic Energy Regulation Committee, and OPA Sri Lanka. So I warmly welcome all the representatives and members of these forums and bodies. And in order to represent the academia, we have invited a set of academic persons as well. So on behalf of ISL and the Electrical, Electronic and Telecommunication Sectional Committee, I would like to warmly welcome everyone and all the guests in other invitees, ladies and gentlemen. So we are going to start the program without taking much time. I would like to invite the President of ISL, Engineer Professor Ranjit Disanayake, to give away an introductory session and start this program. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. It's my great pleasure to introduce the session. First of all, I would like to invite on behalf of the ISL, Dr. Indrajit Kumarasamy, as well as Mr. Suresh Shah, and Dr. Susantha as a moderator, as well as Mr. Milinda Rajapaksa to the ISL for this session. And thank you very much for accepting our invitation and being here. The topic that we are discussing today is engineering aspects of the restructuring the government enterprises and the way forward for the sustainable economic growth. We all know that we had a economic crisis, and now, of course, we are kind of at the bottom in the economical condition. So that all the countries, as well as Sri Lanka, is looking for the sustainable development. As we know that in the sustainable development, there are three pillars: economy, environment, and society. So these are the three pillars that carry in the sustainable development. But out of these three pillars, economical pillar has badly damaged. With that, of course, the environment as well as the socially also damaging. Environment, wherever you go, you see there a lot of garbage and pollution and so forth. Socially, of course, the youth are trying to leave the country at the earliest. So this is the situation of the society as well as the environment. But the main reason behind this decisions are the economic downturn. So when we think about how this has come, as I always mentioned that we have been the economy where we always try to import the things for our survival, while even some of the things that we could have manufactured, we have stopped for either there are so many red tapes. So among the government enterprises that can contribute a lot for this economic crisis. As we see that some of the private companies, while making the profit, similar organizations are having a lot of losses. So that therefore there should be a restructuring process. Therefore, I think this is the right time, because now even small children of this country understand the importance of the economy. Even the general public and the politician and the officers and everybody. So as while we are understanding this importance of the restructuring of the economy, the enterprises, if you do not do the action, we will be late, because as a Sri Lankan, we always forget after several days or months. Therefore, before forgetting, we should get the action, because always there are different parties who has a different hidden agenda. Whatever the action that we want to implement, always they come up with a different angle. That is what has happened, why we could not supply the power continuously. Many good initiative taken by the different government could not materialize because of the different parties come up with a different hidden agenda. It might be political, it can be economical or geopolitics, whatever the matter it is. But this is the right time, because nobody cannot complain about, because we see that the losses of the government enterprises. Therefore, transforming this to the profitable in the different way is the good way forward, right? Therefore, I think I really congratulate Electrical Engineering Sectional Committee Chairman for organizing this. And I asked one question few minutes before, why you thought of doing this? And then he told me that there are so many organizations belong to the electronic engineering restructuring. Then I felt, but civil also them, but I think there is nothing now we have left in the civil engineering, the restructure, because they all are gone, like, right? Like STNCC and CC, there is nothing, only the CELTA is there. Therefore, we have to, rather than restructuring, we have to rebuild it like that. So with that short message, I would like to, while congratulating, and I wish that you will have a wonderful day. Thank you so much again.
So we will going to start the session right away. So today's session is moderated by Dr. Susantha Pereira. Let me introduce him to the audience, and he will handle the floor then after. Dr. Susantha Pereira obtained BSc Engineering degree from University of Moratuwa. Then he joined Ceylon Electricity Board, and he got an opportunity to admit to the University of Pennsylvania to read his doctorate in energy management and policy. He worked as the additional general manager transmission and later general manager of CEV. Further, he served in the Ministry of Power and Energy as the additional secretary in technical. So without taking much time, I would like to invite Dr. Susantha Pereira to the podium. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for that brief introduction. Now, my task is to introduce the two speakers today. And when I was asked to do this, I was thinking what can one say about somebody like Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy that people do not already know, right? So in that way, I would say it's a humbling experience to introduce both of you. Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy is a well-known economist and a career central banker, having over 40 years of experience in policymaking and providing advisory services on macroeconomic policy issues at both national and intergovernmental levels. He graduated from Cambridge University and obtained his doctorate in economics from the University of Sussex. He joined the Central Bank of Sri Lanka in 1973 and worked in its economic research, statistics, and bank supervision departments until 1989. During this period, he also worked for the Ministry of Finance and Planning from 1981 to 89 on secondment from the Central Bank. Thereafter, he served at the Commonwealth Secretariat in London during the period 1990 to 2008 as a senior economist and held the positions of the Director of the Economic Affairs Division, Deputy Director in the Secretary General's Office, and Interim Director of the Commonwealth Secretariat's Social Transformation Program Division. Dr. Kumaraswamy assumed duties in July 2016 as the 14th Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka and served in that position until December 2019. He has served as an independent non-executive director of several listed companies, including John Keys Holding PLC and Tokyo Cement Company, Lanka PLC. With that brief introduction, which sort of captures only a few highlights of his illustrious career, may I invite you to take the podium. The next, thank you, sir. The next speaker is Mr. Suresh Shah. Mr. Shah is a fellow member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka and has served as the chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce and the chairman of the Employers Federation of Ceylon. He has also served as a commissioner of the Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka, a member of the Council of the University of Moratuwa, and a member of the Monetary Policy Consultative Committee of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Mr. Shah was the Chief Executive Officer and board member of a publicly listed company for 30 years before his retirement. He currently sits on the boards of several publicly listed companies as an independent non-executive director and serves as the chairman of one company. He heads the state-owned enterprise reform unit of the government of Sri Lanka. Now, the last time he had a presentation at OPA, which I attended, and he was introduced by one of our mutual colleagues, and he made a comment that, you know, our friend left out an important detail. That was that we were classmates. So I will not make the same mistake. He and I were classmates a long time ago in a place called Royal College. Thank you very much, please. With that, may I invite Dr. Kumaraswamy to make his presentation.
Professor Dissanayake, Dr. Pereira, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank the IESL for inviting me to share some thoughts with you. The main presentation is going to come from Suresh, who is going to talk to you about the subject you're most interested in, which is the crucial SOE reforms. In my case, I'm going to try to kind of set the background to it by talking a little bit about the progress that's been made in stabilizing the economy so far, and also to assess what more needs to be done to get the economy back to sustained recovery. So in terms of stabilizing the economy, I think, one can very convincingly make a case that impressive progress has been made from 2 years ago. If you look at where the economy was, say in the first and second quarters of 2022, where we've got to now in terms of availability of supplies, the various macroeconomic indicators, there has been a very significant improvement. But we have a very long way to go, because the improvement in stabilizing the economy has not been felt by 50–60% of our population. They still have not really felt any upward movement in terms of their quality of life. So we need to see how that can be addressed. And also, there are a couple of other issues which need addressing, which I will also talk to you about. So let me start by talking about the very impressive progress that's been made. If you look at the macroeconomic indicators, we had 6 consecutive quarters where growth contracted. And the peak to trough drop, the decline in the level of GDP was of the order of 11%. So there was a 7.8% contraction in the economy in 2022, and the 23 number hasn't come out, but it'll probably be about 3%. So about 11% of drop in the absolute level of GDP. So it's going to take us, say we grow at 3 or 4, let's say 4%, that's a pretty tall ask to average 4% in the next few years. If we do, it's still going to take us 3 years to go back to where we were in 2021. So that's the scope or nature of the challenge that we have. But from where we were, we have made very significant progress in terms of stabilizing things. So growth is one indicator where we've turned the corner, but we're still at the bottom, really. Then, if you look at inflation, inflation peaked at 70%. I mean, that's really, when you think about when inflation gets to 20%, people say this is really terrible and it's got bad. This went up to 70% in September 2022. By September 2023, it had come down to 1.5%. Since then, there has been an upward movement of inflation through the kind of one-off effects of VAT increases plus the removal of exemptions. But the central bank is confident that after this kind of upward trend for a few months, the inflation will level out at the middle of the inflation target. The inflation target that has been set by the government for the central bank is 5% plus minus 2%. So the range is 3 to 7%. Now, the central bank is confident that the inflation will remain within the range, and in a couple of months, come back and settle in the middle of the range. So that's inflation. And I think a great deal of credit needs to be given to the governor and his team in the central bank for managing inflation in the way they have. Nobody, the IMF, nobody expected them to be able to bring inflation down as decisively as they have done. Quite correctly, the central bank and the governor and his team hit inflation very hard. They drove interest rates up very quickly so that they could get inflation out of the system as fast as they could, which they have succeeded in doing. Of course, they were criticized at the time, but I think they've been proved to be right, that we've got rid of inflation much faster than anybody expected us to do. So down from 70, now down to about 5.6 or something like that, which in the space of 14 months is quite remarkable. They've done very well on that front. Then if you look at fiscal performance, people were not at all convinced that the government will be able to collect the revenue target that the IMF had set for the government. And they also, the IMF expected the Treasury to achieve a primary surplus in the budget. Even that, there was a lot of skepticism whether that would be possible in 2023. They hit both targets in 2023. On revenue, the target was 10.9% of GDP, but they collected 11.1. Far too, our expenditure is 20. So 11.1 is nothing to be proud about, but at least we hit the target and got a bit ahead of the target. And as far as the surplus in the primary balance is concerned, we had a surplus. Let me explain the primary balance a little bit for you. The primary balance is total revenue minus total expenditure, and it needs to be in surplus. If the primary balance is not in surplus, you are borrowing to meet the current year's expenditure, i.e. you are adding on to your debt stock. If you don't cover all your expenditure in a given year, by the revenue you collect in that year, you are borrowing and adding on to the debt stock. So if you're serious about attacking the debt stock and bringing it down, you have to have a primary surplus. Sri Lanka has had a primary surplus in the budget only 4 times before last year, from 1954 onwards. And 2 of those years was when Mangala Samaraweera was finance minister in 2017 and 2018. And then again last year. So 5 times since 1954. Is every other year, total expenditure was more than the revenue we collected, and we were adding on to our debt. So again, on the fiscal side, we are still, our revenue needs to get up to at least 15% of GDP. We are at about 11.1, so much more work to do, but at least we have a primary surplus. We achieved a primary surplus. We need to achieve a primary surplus of 2.3% of GDP going forward in the IMF program. So and the third thing is the external balance, the foreign balance of the economy. There again, we had a surplus in the current account. The current account basically is exports of goods, services, remittances, tourism, etc. And on the import side, the outflow side, it's again goods basically and services. So invariably, I don't know how many years we've had a current account surplus, but very, very few. We have a deficit in the current balance of the balance of payments. So we have been what they call a twin deficit country, which is the most vulnerable country. Let me take this up. I don't need this. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry if I interrupted. So I was saying that Sri Lanka is a classic twin deficit country with a deficit in the current account of the balance of payments and a deficit in the thank you, and a deficit in the primary balance of the budget. So this is the most vulnerable kind of country you have, and that's where we have been. But hopefully last year, on both fronts, we made some progress. Nothing like enough, but we went in the right direction. So, which is why I say that, from where we were 2 years ago, we have made significant progress as far as stabilizing the economy is concerned. So growth has turned positive, but long way to go. The inflation has come down and is near the target. The budget, the key targets we have met last year, and on the balance of payments, we have got a surplus, which is very unusual for us, the surplus in the current account. So that's the good part of the story. But I must say that this is not the first time we have achieved good progress in stabilizing the economy under IMF program. As you know, we have had 17 programs. Now, On previous programs also, we have made, to start with in the program, fairly good progress in stabilizing the economy. But then as time passes and elections approach, the discipline goes. And we go back to square one, and then again, inflation goes up, the balance of payments becomes unsustainable, and we have to go back to the army, right? So 16, 17 times. So this is why it's crucial. We are getting to that dangerous phase now, when governments find it very difficult to maintain discipline in the face of the pressures of the electoral cycle. So it's crucial that this time we don't fall into the same trap. Now, let me next kind of pose the question. Have we done or taken measures to address the repeating problems we have had? As I said, we've had twin deficit situation. So have we taken steps to address that? So there have been a couple of very important measures which have been taken or are being taken. So let me say, I'll give you a little bit of history, if I may, as context. One is, at the time of independence, we were second to Japan in Asia on many indicators. We have gone backwards. And, we've had a lot of social problems, political problems. But for me, the most significant cause of our regression has been macroeconomic stress. Macroeconomic stress caused by unsustainable budget deficits. In plain language, it means that we have been living beyond our means. Since 48, consistently, we have been living beyond our means. As I said, only 4 years in which we've had a primary surplus. How did we get away with it? How were we able to do this and get away with it without having a major crisis like we did in the last couple of years? We were able to get away with it because, one, at the time of independence, we had big buffers. We had external reserves covering 11 months of imports. Public debt was something like 15% of GDP, and we had sinking funds, or that is money to cover the debt also. So, we have a very strong position, and that gave us a buffer to kind of keep going in the first 10 years after independence. By the late 50s, we were getting into trouble and we were having pressure, and then we closed the economy as a response to that. And by 77, we got to a situation after closing the economy of very low investment, very low growth, very high inflation. If you take the black market prices, because the official price was one price, but very few goods were available at that price. So you had to buy it in the black market. If you look at the black market prices, we had very high inflation and we had very high unemployment. So low investment, low growth, high inflation, high unemployment. That's the situation we were in. And that's why we were forced to open the economy and change course. After that, we didn't change our ways. We were still living beyond our means, even after that. But we were the second country after Chile to liberalize our economy of those countries which had gone down an inward-looking route. Chile at that time was under General Pinochet, who was a very harsh dictator. So the traditional donors, basically the Western country and Japan, couldn't hold Chile up as a model. But we had an open polity, and we had changed over to an open economy. So Sri Lanka became the poster child. And we were what was called a donor darling. We got very generous amounts of foreign aid. And because we were a low-income country at the time, for large amounts of foreign aid, extremely generous terms. We're talking about 10-year grace periods, 20, 30-year maturity, 1% administration charge. That are the terms on which we were getting this foreign aid. So every year, the World Bank would convene the Sri Lanka Aid Consortium. The Sri Lanka's external finance, we had an external financing gap because we were still living beyond our means, remember? We were having primary deficits in the budget all along. So they put together the donor meeting. The donors would come, and because of this keenness to show good development outcomes in a country with an open economy and open polity, they would give us the aid to fill the gap. When they felt that the gap was a bit unsustainable, they sent us off. They sent us off to the IMF, and the IMF would give some policies to reduce the imbalances. So we had a mix of compression, of demand compression, and foreign aid on very concessional terms, which kept us on the road. So we kept on going like this. Then we graduated to middle-income country status. So you graduate when your per capita income goes above a certain threshold. And the thing was, our per capita income went over the threshold, where we went from low-income country getting very cheap concessional loans to a middle-income country having to borrow from markets through growth, which was fueled by the non-tradable sector. That is, sectors like construction, like transport, personal services, growth, the public service double, even that is counted as growth in the national accounts. But these were, the growth took place in sectors which did not earn or save foreign exchange. So we shifted from very cheap loans as a low-income country. We graduate, get much more expensive loans from the markets, and we're also exposed to rating agencies, which would then, the rating determines our access to that money. And at the same time, the money we are borrowing, we are not putting to use to earn or save foreign exchange, because we are putting it to sectors, that I call the non-tradable sectors, like construction and transport, etc. So this was a train crash waiting to happen. We were going in that direction, right? Borrowing from abroad, putting it in the wrong place, not earning or saving enough money. And then we had a couple of bad policy mistakes, the pandemic, wars, etc. And we went over the brink really to a massive crisis. So how do we get out of this? To get out of this, one, you have to have primary surplus in the budget consistently. So you're not adding on to your debt stock. And you have to start increasing non-debt creating flows. And that is really exports, remittances, tourism, FDI, all these things we need to get to, as I said. So what these are doing are attacking the two deficits that I talked about. The budget deficit you attack by having a primary surplus, and the external deficit you attack by increasing non-debt creating flows. So that's what we need to get done. And so what are we doing? What do we need to do most urgently? Now, the reforms, we've done very well, right, in stabilizing. But to get growth going, for people to feel the improvement, you have got to have structural reforms, which increase the growth trajectory, the income generating trajectory and employment trajectory of the economy. What we normally do is, when we find that growth is low and an election is coming, we artificially create growth by having a large budget deficit that pumps money into the economy. Then the central bank had what they call fiscal forbearance in its monetary policy. It prints money. It keeps interest rates artificially low so that the government has cheap money, and also that businesses have cheap money. But you can't artificially keep interest rates low for very long, because what happens is this money, the excess money in the system, excess aggregate demand is the technical term, creates inflation and balance of payments pressure. Currency goes, becomes unsustainable, and then you have to go to the IMF and put the stabilization process in. Repeating cycle, time after time after time, 17 times now. I'm told it's Einstein who said that if you do the same thing again and again and expect different outcomes, that is the definition of insanity. We have done the same thing 17 times. So I hope we don't expect different outcomes this time, because otherwise it'll be very difficult to convince people that we are not insane. Because, after such a major crisis, to again do the same thing and get ourselves into trouble again. And this time, we were a middle-income country. There were some buffers, right? People had some, they could sell an asset, they could pawn an asset, They could have got some money from their relatives and friends. So there was some way people have been able to cope. Very tough. People have been cutting down meals, not sending children to school, all that, but still they have just about coped. Now, if we again let things go and have to impose another round of austerity, in my view, we will have a social implosion. I don't see how we can avoid it because people just don't have the buffer to take on any more pain by way of austerity. So we have to get it right this time. So what are some of the things we need to do? One is, of course, SOE reform, which Suresh will talk to you about. Then we need to, I'm going to run through these. I can in the Q&A answer, but they're called factor markers. We need to reform our land policies. We need to reform our labor policies. Now the government is planning to bring an employment law. We need to reform, strengthen our capital markets. All these things we've been talking for a long time. In the 1980s, I was seconded from the central bank to the Ministry of Finance, and I became the late Ronnie DeMel, who just passed away, his bag carrier. So I used to go around with him, listening to him make speeches. I found that when I was in the central bank from 2016 to 2019, I was saying the same things that he said in the 1980s. We had learned nothing, done nothing. Same mistakes again and again, right? So as I said, this time we have to do it differently. So what are some of the things we need to do? Land, labor, capital market, we have to reform. We have to improve the investment climate, investment promotion. There was a Vietnamese representative at the recent Ceylon Chamber Summit. I happened to be seated next to him, and he said that their president went to Korea 3 times personally and met Samsung. And he kept asking them, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? 3 times he went, and Samsung invested in, they were the first big company to invest in Vietnam, and look what's happening in Vietnam in terms of foreign investment now. Because the demonstration effect of a company like Samsung coming in and investing in your country, there's a massive, massive impact. And also the suppliers come, at one time, Samsung accounted for 40% of Vietnam's exports. But now, they've gone to a very different place from us. So all these are, so we have to get investment going. We have to get exports going, markets, new markets, products which are more complex and higher value. So there's a range of things that we need to do to drive up non-debt creating inflows, particularly export. And if you look at around the world, whether you're a country as big as China or small as Singapore, FDI has played a critical role in driving the export transformation. So we have had an appalling record as far as FDI is concerned. We have been giving tax holidays about one after the other, etc. Nobody comes, right? Because we don't have the stability. Our policy, everybody knows when you get your macro policies wrong, you can see it coming. As I was telling you, you could see the crash coming in Sri Lanka because we have, the inherently unstable policies. So investors are not going to come and put in money unless you have this macro stability, political stability, legal system, confidence in the legal system, enforcement of contract, all those basic things, which we still haven't got right. So we have to get all those things right. I think efforts are being made to get them right, but we need to be very decisive, very focused, and drive these things through. Then I'll just give you a few sectors which I think are a priority. One, I think, is agriculture. We have to modernize our agriculture. 25% of the labor force gets a primary source of income from agriculture. It yields 7% of GDP. So that shows how low productivity is in agriculture. So we have to fix that. The second thing is tourism. It's a low-hanging fruit. We are targeting 5 million eventually. Malaysia gets over 20 million, right? So that's a long way to get there. But what I'm saying is there is significant upside if we get the policies right and maintain stability in the country. Then the third area, I think, is shipping and logistics, particularly if India keeps growing at the rate it's expected to. From our position, we have a real opportunity to develop the shipping and logistics sector. So those, I think, are 3 key sectors which, in my view, are low-hanging fruit. And the other thing is taking advantage of the proximity to India. There seems to be a consensus that India is going to be the fastest growing large economy. Now, if you look to the east of us, when first Japan and then China had their growth surges, all the countries in that region benefited from that. They basically plugged into the supply chains. So if India has fast growth for the next 10 years or so, we need to find ways of plugging into their supply chains. And it's not impossible at all, because South India in particular is already growing at double digits. A lot of FDI is coming in with the restructuring of supply chains away from China for geopolitical reasons. So we need to have greater integration with the Indian economy. We need to, our mindset, we need to rethink. In a very senior Asian Development Bank official told me the difference between East and Southeast Asia and South Asia. He said, when I convene regional meetings in East and Southeast Asia, they have, there are very troubled histories. There are very troubled histories between Japan and China, between Japan and Korea. Their history is as complex and as mixed as our history with India. But when they come to meetings, they get down to business and they are very pragmatic. They're only interested in doing business and getting things done. He said, if I go to South Asia, the whole meeting is spent, the countries accusing each other of this and that, and nothing happens. Utterly useless conversation, but how A has done something to B and B has done something to D, and it's a completely emotional and non-productive meetings that you have in the region, in our region. So we need to somehow get understood. Other people, if they want to be emotional, let them be emotional in our region, but we need to be absolutely pragmatic, focused on what we need to do and get things done and take advantage of the opportunities. We've been close to India forever, but in terms of proximity geographically, but both countries had very poor infrastructure. So the transaction cost of doing cross-border business was very high. Now, roads, ports, airports, and both countries are improving. So the transaction costs are coming down. That makes it easier to have cross-border business. And then we can do all these connectivity things that are being talked about. So we need to basically take advantage of what's happening in India. That is the easiest way for us to really get our growth trajectory to a different level, in the same way that Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and that's the second wave. And the first wave was, of course, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Korea. They benefited from China, first Japan and then China. We need to benefit in the same way, and the conditions are right. Quick word on poverty. Poverty was down at 6% in 2018. Today, it's estimated to be 30%. That is income poverty. People living at less than $3.40 per day. The UNDP did a survey of what they call multidimensional vulnerability. That in addition to income poverty, they have access to education, access to health, and vulnerability to natural disasters also built in. There are 55% of the population is multidimensionally vulnerable. So that is the situation we are in. Malnutrition among children is going up and going up sharply. So this is a situation. So we have to get this growth and employment going, higher value employment, not just employment, but higher value employment going, so that we can address these problems. It is not, a lot of people will say, bring down electricity prices, bring down fuel prices, give free fertilizer. That is the way to help the poor. It is not. We've done it for years and it's not got us anywhere. What we have to do is to have full cost pricing for electricity and fuel and fertilizer, etc. But you have to make sure that you have a very sound and robust social safety net. Social safety net through cash transfers. The government gives cash transfers to a clearly defined and transparently and objectively identified group. We politicize all the time. Now, Aswesuma, my colleague in this advisory group, Professor Shanta Devarajan, who's a global authority on social travel and cash transfers, constantly advocated the first thing we should do is to set up the cash transfer scheme, build it up, have a larger amount in terms of the cash transfer scheme, and have a very clear, transparent way of identifying those who need it. And units of electricity consumption, Professor Dhirani Gunawardena at Peradeniya has suggested that. And that's a clean, transparent way of doing it. Not perfect, but it's much better than the present rather confused way. And now again, there's a concern that, it's all getting politicized, which we mustn't. So short-term solution for the increased poverty is bump up the cash transfers. In fact, the allocation, which was 60 billion for Samruddhi, is now 200 billion for Aswasam, 3 times as large. But we must make sure we identify the right group, because if we put people who don't deserve it into the scheme for political reasons, then the people who deserve it are going to get less, because they're just a fixed pool of money. And if the numbers are increased without justification, you're going to not have to help those who need it as much as they need to be helped. So those are some of the issues. Let me two last points. One, India basically went to the IMF in 1991. They had a major crisis. They never have been there again. And why is it that we have been 70 years? So from 1991, we've probably been 10, 12 times. Why is that difference? The difference, in my view, is because there is a consensus between the two major parties in terms of the overall policy. Whether it is Congress or BJP, they have a consensus on the overall policy. Every time the government changes, they don't, reverse policy this way, that way. Recently, we did a 180-degree reversal in terms of policies, and now we are implementing the policies which we were implementing between 2015 and 2019. We've gone back to that after doing a 180-degree turn in between. So those kinds of things, is why we have gone 17, 18 times the IMF, and they have not gone even once after that. So that's critical. Basically to say, we have a very narrow track. Even if we implement the reforms as the IMF has set it out, our debt to GDP will be 95% in 2032. Now, if we deviate and don't make it, it's going to be worse. Now, the mean for a market access country is 70% of GDP. Even after we implement the program, successfully, it will be 95. So we can't shift this. We have to implement it, stay on track. We can't allow politics to trump economics. For 76 years, we've allowed politics to trump economics. It has to stop this time. And I think we, the professionals in particular, need to study this. And we can't say this, leave it to the government, because the government has not been helpful to deliver for it. So the people must take an interest in all these kind of policies, including macro policies, and put pressure on our government, whoever it is, to make sure the right things are done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for explaining some of the very complex macroeconomic issues, both from a historical and policy perspective, in a way that even the engineers could understand. Next, I will invite my colleague, Suresh, to make his presentation.
Thank you, Susanta. President of the Institute of Engineers, Dr. Kumarasamy, ladies and gentlemen. Let me get my... Firstly, let me thank the Institute of Engineers for arranging this session to speak on state-owned enterprise reforms. This is not the first time that Sri Lanka is attempting state-owned enterprise reforms. This is probably the 5th or 6th time that we are making the attempt. So we've done it, stopped, done it, stopped, done it, stopped, and so on and so forth. And will we, this time as well, we've started because of an economic crisis. like Dr. Kumarasamy said, we come to a point, we stabilize the economy, and then we do U-turns. Will it happen again? Not just with state-owned enterprise reforms, but also with other policies. The reason when it comes to state-owned enterprise reforms, the reason why we have attempted this 4 or 5 or 6 times up to now is because there have been, I would say, the wrong ideas being espoused in the country about the SOE sector. So to start with, we are told as a country, we have been told that these state-owned enterprises are national assets. Now, I ask myself whether any commercial enterprise, and here what we are talking about fundamentally are commercial enterprises that generate revenue, that are supposed to make profit, whether any commercial enterprise can be called a national asset. Think of, let's leave the state-owned enterprises out, but think of even companies like John Keel's or MAS or Brandix. Are these really national assets? Can any commercial enterprise be termed a national asset? Because in my mind, a national asset is an asset that can be used to transform a country. Not just to contribute some profit to it, but an asset that can be used to transform a country. And so I asked the question, can any commercial enterprise be used to transform a nation? Or are there other things that are truly national assets that can be used to transform a nation? So for example, in my mind, a national asset is the youth of our country. Because if we give the youth the right type of education, the right kind of values, they will at some point transform the nation. No commercial enterprise can do what the youth of our country can do. Similarly, if you were to think about it, we have an ocean resource, which is roughly 3 times our land mass. If we have invested in that ocean resource, that can transform our country. But we have not put the necessary resources to exploit those ocean resources that we have. Similarly, if you think about it, we have a very fertile soil in this country. You plant anything and it will grow. And Dr. Kumarasamy, during his presentation, spoke of the need to modernize agriculture, to make that a productive and efficient sector. And if we use that asset, that is a transformative asset, unlike any commercial enterprise. Similarly, if you think about the reservoirs that we have, the reservoir system that we have, the irrigation system that we have, which captures rainwater and then takes it to the last acre of a farmer, if we leverage on that asset, that is a transformative asset, unlike any commercial enterprise. But what have we done? We have focused our attention on these commercial enterprises called state-owned SOEs, and we have invested in those enterprises rather than the true national assets that we have. And this is why, as Dr. Kumarasamy said, when we started in 1948, just as we got independence, we were second only to Japan within Asia. But today we are far behind many of those Asian countries. We are behind South Korea, we are behind Malaysia, we are behind Singapore, we are behind Thailand, and even countries like Bangladesh that got independence something like 23 years after our independence. We had to go begging to borrow something as little as $400 million from them for us to simply survive. It is because we have not invested our money, our resources, not just our money, but our resources in the true national assets of this country. But instead, we have focused our attention on some commercial enterprises called the SOEs. So this is one of the reasons why the SOE reforms have had a stop-start process. The second reason that people speak of when it comes to state-owned enterprises is that profit-making enterprises should not be divested. Now, behind this particular theme, I believe is the fact that people believe that government will lose revenue if profit-making enterprises are divested. Government will lose the cash flow that these enterprises generate. So let me tell you a few truths about this particular story. First and foremost, what we need to understand is that profits of an enterprise don't belong to the shareholders. What belongs to the shareholders is only the dividends, what is paid from that enterprise. And just to give you a data point, if you take the average dividends that the SOEs have declared over the last 10 years, prior to COVID, let's leave COVID and thereafter out of it, but prior to COVID, the 10 years, the amount of dividends declared by all the SOEs in the country works out to about 0.5% of GDP. 0.5% of GDP, not even 0.5% of total revenue, not even 1% of total revenue. So it's an extremely small number. Point number one. Point number two, government does not need to operate commercial enterprises to generate revenue because governments and only governments have this very unique mechanism of revenue generation. And that is called taxes. Nobody else can impose taxes other than a government, and government can impose taxes on anything it wants. As all of us have seen, they impose taxes on all of us, on the income that we make, which is fine, but they can also impose taxes on the debt. For example, debt duty. They can impose taxes on imports. They can impose taxes on exports. They can impose taxes on the sale of any item. They can impose taxes on practically anything they want. So governments have a unique system where they can get the revenue that they need. So they don't need to run commercial enterprises to generate the revenue that they need. This is point number two. Point number three is from every enterprise in the country, the government gets a share of that enterprise's operations in the form, it gets in two forms. One is it gets taxes of the revenue of every enterprise, which all of us know, it's called VAT. In addition to that, there are other levies also on revenue, like social security levy and so on and so forth. From time to time, there have been other taxes. And then from the profits of every enterprise, governments earn an income tax. The current rate is 30%. So without any involvement in any commercial operations, but from every commercial operation in the country, government has a source of revenue. It doesn't need to do anything. It just gets this revenue, both from the top line of every company and the bottom line of every company. Now, we all know that the private sector is a much better manager of capital. The private sector is a much more efficient and effective manager of capital. So a company in the hands of the private sector is much more likely to generate a higher tax revenue to government than a government-run entity. So if a company was to be moved from government into private hands, the chances are that the revenue that the entity under private hands, the tax revenue that it would generate, would be greater than the revenue government would get under its own management. So these are some of the broad reasons why this whole concept of profit-making, loss-making enterprises is frankly a non-starter. It's of no relevance. And let me go one step further and explain this to you with some other data points. Let me take the example of one of the companies that is being divested right now. It's listed on the stock exchange, so I can speak of the numbers. Sri Lanka Telecom, profitable company. Remember what I said earlier, that the profit of the enterprise doesn't belong to the shareholders, it's only the dividends. So if you take the dividends that SLT has declared to government over the last 10 years, it averages a little under ₹1 billion a year, average. Under ₹1 billion per year, that's the dividends that government has received from Sri Lanka Telecom. Sri Lanka Telecom is today listed on the stock exchange. Its market value is ₹180 billion. Government owns 50% of Sri Lanka Telecom, roughly. And if government were to dispose of this at the market value, it'll get a cash inflow of ₹80 billion. If this 80 billion is invested in a fixed deposit at current rates of around 8%, each year the government would get an interest income of 6.4 billion, as against the dividend it has been getting of 1 billion a year. So if we are simply talking about cash flow from these entities, you can see that it really has no relevance from many angles. So this story about profit-making entities and loss-making entities doesn't come into the picture when we talk about state-owned enterprise reform. That's the second point. The third reason why SOE reforms have not gone to a logical conclusion is because people keep talking about national security. And this again is said these days mainly in relation to Sri Lanka Telecom. We are told that if Sri Lanka Telecom is divested, there is a major national security issue for the country. Now, I really don't know how this comes about. Because if you think about it carefully, between the period 1997 or 1998 and I think 2008, Sri Lanka Telecom was run, and this was during the height of the war in the country. Sri Lanka Telecom was under the management of a foreign firm, NTT of Japan. So if there was a national security issue surrounding Sri Lanka Telecom, how is it that during the height of the war, that entity was under the management of a foreign entity? And it was privatized in 1997. So it was at the time of privatization during the height of the war that Sri Lanka Telecom was under a foreign entity. Leave that aside. If you speak to any senior politician in the country today, the majority of them, they use dialogue mobile phones. As senior politicians, if there are national security issues, why are they speaking on dialogue mobile phones? They should all be using Mobitel mobile phones. And for some reason, there is this story that is spread that military communications would be questionable if they were run on a telecom network that didn't belong to the state. But does anyone seriously believe that confidential military communications happen over public networks? That is not the case. The Telecom Regulatory Authority, or the TRCSL, has allocated separate bandwidth or separate spectrum for military communications. So those communications don't happen over Dialog or Mobitel or Hutch or whoever. They have their own network for confidential communications. And people speak of the data security. And they say that if SLT is no longer in the hands of government, the security of our data is at threat. So let me give you a small example on this. Let's say the security in Sri Lanka is fine. There is no problem. It's fully secured. But you take some data and you send it out to via email to somebody in, let's say, Bangladesh, how do you know what the security in Bangladesh is like? So just because your data is secure here, how can you ensure that your data is secured in Bangladesh? What control do we have over that? And then we are told about the CMEV cables. Now, the impression that is created is that the CMEV cable is owned by Sri Lanka Telecom. But that is not the case. The CMEV cable has a number of shareholders from many countries around the world. And Sri Lanka Telecom is only one amongst a number of shareholders. So that cable, or those cables, there are 5, I believe now 5, and the 6th one is coming. These are owned by entities in the Maldives, in India, in Pakistan, Middle East, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there is French ownership, and so on and so forth. So these are the stories that we have been told as citizens to cloud our minds on the reforms, to prevent the reforms taking place. And why do people not want these reforms to take place? Because unfortunately, there are vested interests. Vested interests in the forms of people who use these enterprises for their own personal benefit. And of course, from the perspective of employees, they have genuine concerns about employment security and terms of employment. That is a genuine concern, and I think we need to take that into account. But these stakeholders have put the wrong information into our heads and have prevented the reforms in the SOE sector, which is why we've had this stop-start process around these reforms. So moving forward, the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, on what basis should the government decide? Should a government, not just the Sri Lankan government, but a government, decide when it needs to be involved in a commercial activity? And there are certain circumstances under which a government has a responsibility to be involved in a commercial activity. And that goes back to the responsibilities of government. And if you think about it, the responsibilities of government has a responsibility for national security. It has a responsibility for the economy of the country, for the education system, for foreign policy. And it has a responsibility to provide the citizens with essential goods and services. But essential goods and services. It has to ensure that citizens have access to decent quality, decent price, decent availability of these essential products and services. So if the government believes that there aren't sufficient private sector participants to provide citizens with these essential products and services, then government has a role to step in and say, we may need to take on this activity. Now, but before it does that, it needs to ask itself another question, whether they can use other mechanisms, because governments are very powerful. Governments have a number of tools to ensure that essential products and services are supplied under competitive or are with good quality, good price, and so on and so forth. They have the legislation capability, regulation capability, they can have incentives offered, and so on and so forth. So if government feels that it cannot implement the right tools to provide the citizens with these essential goods and services at competitive prices, competitive quality, then and only then does it have a duty or a responsibility to step in and take on a commercial operation. And this is called market failure. If market failure is not present, governments then do not need to step in into commercial activity. So that is how the decision as to whether an enterprise stays within government or should it be in the hands of the private sector. That is the fundamental way in which the decision needs to be made. Of course, in certain countries, there are national security issues. I don't see such an issue in Sri Lanka, and that can be a consideration. And at the same time, there may be development needs that a government wants to fulfill, private sector doesn't want to participate or cannot participate. And then under those circumstances, a government may wish to step into a commercial activity as well. So this is the basis on which a decision has to be taken. Does a government need to play a role in a commercial enterprise or not? So it's not about profitability. It's not about losses. It is not about being a national asset and so on and so forth. But it is this very fundamental question. Is there market failure? Can it be addressed through different tools? If the answer is no, then the government has a responsibility to step in. So in Sri Lanka as well, there are certain enterprises that may have to remain within government for the foreseeable future. Now, one of the responsibilities that we have as a unit is to put in place a system to ensure that these entities that remain within government are well managed going forward, so that they are no longer a burden on the fiscal, and at the same time that they provide citizens with the right quality of product or service at the right price and at the right availability. So in order to do this, we have crafted a state-owned enterprise policy, which has been approved by Cabinet, and that is now being transferred into an SOE law. Now, I'll give you some of the features of this SOE policy. First and foremost, it says the basis on which government needs to decide, the explanation I gave you, whether it should be in commercial business or not. Secondly, it speaks of the need to form a holding company, like the Temasek model. All of you must have heard of the Temasek model. To create a holding company under which all the state-owned enterprises will come as subsidiaries. So that's the second point. The third point is that all SOEs will be transformed into limited liability companies under the Companies Act. Now, today there are state-owned enterprises. Some of them are limited liability companies, like say Sri Lanka Telecom or Sri Lanka Insurance. Then there are others which are called corporations. An example is something like the Cashew Corporation. And then there are some which are called agencies and so on and so forth. And in many of these instances, these different entities have their own law. So what is being recommended is that we move away from that. And when you have too many laws, it's difficult to manage. So you move away from that system, bring every entity as a limited liability company and bring them under the Companies Act. So that's one of the principles in the SOE policy. The next principle in the SOE policy is that we bring the ownership and the management under one ministry. Now, today, the ownership of all these enterprises, particularly if they're limited liability companies, remains with the Ministry of Finance. But the operational responsibility of the entity is with a line ministry. So you have an owner and you have an operator. And these two, the objectives of these two are not necessarily the same. So if you take Sri Lankan Airlines, whilst the shares are owned by the Ministry of Finance, the operations come under the Ministry of Aviation. So our recommendation is that we bring the operations also under the Ministry of Finance, so that the owner is also responsible for the operations. So it's a single owner structure. Then, as we all know, these entities have been very poorly managed because board appointments, for example, have not been based on capability, on skills, on capacity, on experience, but it has been based more on who somebody knows. Somebody's brother, somebody's sister, somebody's uncle, and so on and so forth. So we've put in a system to reduce the political interference in the appointments of boards. be it to the holding company or be it to the respective SOE. There is a mechanism that has been created. I can't discuss that, unfortunately. It's confidential at this moment until we have approval from different points. But it attempts to create, and I believe it succeeds to a great extent, to create a Chinese wall between political interest and professional management. Another principle around which the SOE policy is built is, we say that the listing rules and the disclosure requirements for a limited liability company, for a publicly listed company, will apply to all the SOEs. Just excuse me a moment. The background to this is that, just think about it. If a company with 1,000 shareholders has to publish its accounts every quarter, why shouldn't a company with 22 million shareholders do the same? Every SOE has 22 million shareholders at the end of the day. So if a company with 1,000 shareholders is compelled to publish its accounts every quarter, then a company with 22 million shareholders should be asked to do exactly the same. So that is one thing that is also a recommendation, or that is embedded in the SOE policy. Now, let me give you an important example of how the SOE sector has been managed, because that has also led to two other policies that's in the SOE reform policy. I'll give this to you in the form of an example. For many years, thank you. For many years, all of us enjoyed fuel at a subsidized rate. And this subsidy was parked in the balance sheet of Ceylon Petroleum Corporation. Right. Now, in order to recover some of the losses because of these subsidies, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, which is the sole supplier of jet fuel in the country, charged a very high premium from all the airlines that were coming in and out of Colombo Airport. A very high premium compared to the rest of the world. This was done in order to recover some of the losses of the CPC because of the subsidies all of us got. Now, 30% of the operating costs of Sri Lankan Airlines is jet fuel. So when CPC charges all the airlines a very high price for fuel, the losses in Sri Lankan Airlines go up as a result of that. So now you have two entities that are making significant losses, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and Sri Lankan Airlines. And they don't have the money to run their businesses because they're making losses. So what do? The treasury doesn't have the money to pump in, but they still go to the treasury, and the treasury issues a treasury guarantee, which they take and go to the state banks. And the state banks give them the money. Now, the state banks don't get repaid because CPC and Sri Lankan Airlines simply don't have the cash to repay the state bank. So see what has happened. CPC is making a loss. Sri Lankan Airlines is making a loss. The money comes from the state banks. The state banks don't need to make provisions for those loans. Why? Because they are supported by a treasury guarantee. And a treasury guarantee is supposed to be the best level of security. So they don't need to make provisions in their accounts. But they don't get their money. So their balance sheets are under pressure. And in a financial crisis, like what we faced, a treasury guarantee is not worth the paper it is written on. So you see how this vicious cycle has been the result of the way the SOE sector has been managed. So we are bringing two proposals through our SOE policy to address this. Firstly, we are saying that there must be single borrower limits. So the government, with a single shareholder, there are single borrower limits that will apply. So the SOEs can't borrow beyond a particular point in total, number one. And number two, we are saying that no SOE should be able to go to the treasury, get a treasury guarantee, and go to the state banks and get money. We are moving away from the treasury guarantee system. Now, of course, this is going to take some time because you can't do this overnight. Companies will collapse. There needs to be a transition period, and we will work on that transition period. But at some point, the single borrower limits and the treasury guarantees, the single borrower limits will come in, the treasury guarantees will go out. A final principle that we have brought in is that no subsidy can be parked within a commercial entity. So if the government has every right to give its citizens a subsidy, however, we are saying, do not park that subsidy within a commercial entity. You want to give a subsidy, take it into the government's account. Because frankly, whilst the accounting records show that it is, for example, the CPC that has the where the subsidy has been parked, the reality is very different. Because the money for that subsidy came from the state bank. Remember, like I told you, CPC goes to the treasury, gets a treasury guarantee, goes to the state bank, and the state bank gives them the money, and the state bank doesn't get repaid. So really, in reality, it is the state bank that is bearing the subsidy. The subsidy has been, in reality, from a cash perspective, it has been parked inside the state bank, not even in the SOE. And this is a very dangerous situation for the whole financial sector of the country. So we need to move away from this as well. So fundamentally, we are saying, government, you have every right to give a subsidy, but take it into your account. Do not leave it in one of these commercial entities. So this is very roughly the SOE policy that has been approved by Cabinet and which is being now translated into a SOE law. And hopefully, Cabinet will approve the draft law, and then it will go up to Parliament, and it will then become part of the legislation of the country. So the idea is that these enterprises going forward will, on the one hand, meet the requirements of the citizens in terms of essential products and services, and on the other hand, will no longer remain a burden on the fiscal. So I've spoken for a long time. I've covered the SOE policy. On the divestitures, if there are questions, I'll take it during Q&A time. So thank you very much for the patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh, for that excellent explanation. I don't think you spoke for a long time. I don't think long enough. Because I think people should hear this speech all over the place many times, because you addressed some of the popular things that get a lot of political mileage, like national assets, profit-making entities, and that kind of thing. And they are still being talked about, and a lot of people, of course, buy into this idea. In fact, I was watching one of these YouTube channels of a popular radio presenter, Dharmasri Kariyosam, it's in Sinhala. And I am not going to go into all the details. This is on YouTube. I mean, he says that, okay, there were some 93 state-owned industries were sold. Of course, he used the word selling, right? Because I think divesting is a dignified word for selling, according to their book. And he takes the example of Kalini Tires. One thing he says that, this was a gift from a friendly government during Mrs. B's government, that's the Russian government. And, the Sri Lankans are so that, they can even sell the gifts that we receive from, our friends, right? And of course, he gives some statistics saying that, at the time it was sold, I don't know, 1989 or whatever, it was making a profit of 100 million. Now, you address that point, right? They were making profit that 100 million did not go to the government. But of course, he says, it paid taxes, I don't know, some millions. And it had, I don't know, stocks worth of 85 million or something. The other point is that the assets at the time was worth another 120 million rupees, right? I think one of the major complaints about, because you said stop kind of thing, one of the major complaints that people have, which have some validity, I believe, is that these entities were sold for a very cheap price. I don't know how you say whether it's cheap or expensive, because it's also a question of how you value the assets, right? So I don't know. For example, in my view, if the Kalanitai was, it continued as it was, I don't think it's worth anything today, because the technology has changed so much from 30 years ago. So I don't know whether it could do any productive business. So but people don't talk about it. But it is very popular to say that, this is an organization, this is an industry that was making 100 million profits a year, and then paying the government so much. And all of a sudden you get one of your political cronies to buy it, right? So these are some of the things that need to be addressed, but I don't know how we are going to do that. But I think what you just presented was very, very useful, and I think more and more people should hear that. I don't think it's very popular, but nevertheless, it has to be said. So hopefully, this time around, the people who matter will be around long enough to at least see this process through. Unlike so many times we had start-stop things. Okay, with that, I think we will open up for questions. There are few housekeeping rules that I need to tell you. You can ask questions. You can raise your hand, and you can identify yourself. Hold on. And please limit your questions to just one question, because sometimes you find, like, you ask one question, then it goes on to like series of questions, because we want to give everyone a chance, because there are lots of people online, and for those online people, I think the questions are through the chat box, I think mostly. So you can post any questions on the chat box, and the organizers will take up those questions, and we will try to answer those questions as much as possible. For those who are present here, you can ask the questions, and I think the speakers will try to answer them as quickly as possible. Okay, so all right.
Thank you very much for giving opportunity to clarify one thing from Mr. Suresh.
Can you mention the name, sir?
Yeah, I'm Manuja Kanaratne. Professionally, I'm a IT specialist. So I'm working in the government sector. I heard that the process of SOEs, privatization, and how you are expecting to generate money. My point is, why don't you think of the social perspective? Why the benefits of the social getting the social welfare and control of prices, something like of selling off those SOAs rather than the money point of view. You're all concerned about the money. For example, during the last 2022 and 2023, there was a coconut oil price issue, but the BCC Lanka involved in that and control the price. So BCC is a government-owned enterprises making profit. So if we don't going to sell those entities, the benefits we give the society through the control of pricing and the social aspects, and that won't be benefited through the private sector. So how are you going to address those social issues and benefits by privatizing the government-owned entities?
So I address this in two ways. Firstly, we had in terms of subsidized pricing, we had subsidies on fuel, we had subsidies on electricity, we had subsidies, we still have subsidies on fertilizer, we have had subsidies on transport. And in 1948, like Indrajit was saying, we were number 2 to Japan within the Asian region. And today, we have gone backwards. So the system hasn't worked. The subsidy system simply hasn't worked. That's number one. I mean, today, if you take up, do we have petrol subsidies? No. From a subsidized fuel, it went to market price fuel in an extremely short period of time. And it has put tremendous pressure on the citizens. More than fuel, I think even the electricity cost, right? So the subsidy scenario is extremely difficult to sustain over a long period in time. It had to be corrected, it was corrected, and it has brought a lot of hardship to the people. Subsidy is not the way to go. The way to go really is to create income opportunities for people so that they can afford market pricing. That's where the attention needs to be put. So that's the theory part of it, and I'm sure Indrajit will be able to explain it much better than I can. So that is one answer. The other answer is, like I said, if a government wants to pass on a subsidy, it has every right to do that. And you don't need to control an entity to pass a subsidy on. So for example, let's say biscuits. Okay, if the government feels that the consumer needs to get biscuits at 100 rupees a packet, I don't know what the price is, right? It can always tell a manufacturer, you sell it at 100 and we will give you the balance cost. If your price is 150, we want you to sell it at 100. We will give you the 50. So you go sell it to the consumer at 100. So government has many means through which it can achieve its objectives, right? You do not need to control an entity for government to be able to get its writ across to the people. So that's the second answer.
One second, I think you can come back later. I think there are other people.
I did not clarified properly. That's why I'm just want to.
No, I
recap it.
I have no problem. You are asking questions, but I think you can come back later. But let Mr. Prelis.
Thank you. I have some very specific questions from Mr. Shah. We hear about the holding company. Some of these enterprises will be passed on to. How soon is that going to be a reality? The model is both from Temasek and also the equivalent in Malaysia. What are the entities that are going to be in this? 3, will some of these SOE be sold to either entities or whatever outside before it goes into this holding company structure? Because in most other countries like Singapore or Malaysia or Temasek, those entities passed on that, and many of those were made more efficient, profitable over a period of time, and then sold generally in the market, so that the state gets much bigger income, and it is a very transparent thing. So I wonder whether you could throw some light on that. I hope it is not a secret.
No, not at all. So the holding company needs to be preceded by the SOE law, and that law is currently being drafted. It's come to a very good point. It is now we need to send it. I need to get approval from the president. It needs to go to cabinet, from there to parliament. So that will. So no sooner that process is completed and it comes into legislation, then the holding company can be formed. We've even gone to the extent of drafting the articles of association of the holding company. We've identified a very very, very strong mechanism in terms of appointing holding company, the holding company board, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the preparatory work has already been done. In terms of the entities that will come under the holding company, ideally any commercial enterprise. So if government owns shares in a commercial enterprise, it should own shares through the holding company. So that's the overriding principle. There may be some exceptions that I'm not sure at this moment in time, but that's the principle. In terms of restructuring the entities prior to divestiture, yes, that is the classical model. But we also have, time frames and windows of opportunities which we need to make use of. So yes, there will be certain entities that will be divested before the holding company comes in. But sorry, the divestiture.
It's a controversy, of various parties, and these are not transparent.
The
I mean,
process.
if you push it into the stock market in Libya, then to a certain extent it is transparent.
Yeah.
But what has happened is not that. Some
So
private entity comes.
The process that we are following is we have a two-step process. So we are calling for expressions of interest first, and this is being publicized globally. So we've advertised the EOIs for the 6 or 7 entities that we are divesting at the moment in all parts of the world. And anybody who's interested can apply. There is a qualification criteria which people have to fulfill, and then they will be moved into the second phase, which is the RFP phase, where they will get access to the data room, they can do their due diligence, and then there is a process that gets followed thereafter. So in terms of the divestitures that we are doing, the process is pretty open and it is pretty transparent. And it's the same process that is likely to continue even under the holding company. So whether there was a holding company or no holding company, the process of divestiture that we will follow is basically the same. And the divestiture guidelines are available. I mean, it's a public document. It's available on the web, and anyone has access to that. If you wanted to put in a EOI for any one of the companies being divested, you could. So we've set up 2 different committees that do evaluations of the proposals that come in, and so on and so forth. So it's a pretty robust and a pretty transparent system that is being followed by our unit.
That has not been practiced in some of these.
It may not have been practiced in the past, but I can tell you that the work that we are doing through our unit, this is a process that is being followed. And Indrajit just reminds me that the transaction advisors that we've appointed for all these transactions are also very credible people. So if you take Sri Lanka Telecom, if you take Lanka Hospital, Sri Lankan Airlines, it's the International Finance Corporation. That's a transaction advisor. And then we have people like Deloitte who are handling some, and then there's Colliers out of Singapore handling another one, Alvarez and Marcel. So these are all international global transaction advisors. So process is pretty robust.
I am Janakamari. I am asking, why are you considering a government is a separate entity of like that way? It is not a separate entity. All over the country is the government. You are considering government is a separate entity. As an example, then the Air Lanka case, the Air Lanka ground handling is because of the ground handling, catering, and the Air Lanka is the one company. Then ground handling, catering is getting profit. But you are considering only that part, the other loss part. Not by the considering of the Air Lanka, it is, in my view, it is getting profit because it handling tourism. And because most of then those days you have given to, not you, the Air Lanka has given to the Emirates. But because the Sri Lankan airline is one of the oldest company in the world, airline, one of the oldest airline in the world, then they have good, better time slot at the valuable airports. Then country like England, they get tourism to the Sri Lanka. Those tourisms are very valuable. But after sold out, those time slot got the Emirates. But we don't have good time slot. Those tourism now they bring to another countries. They don't bring here. Like that, getting the tourism after coming to the here, they expense their money to see in Sri Lanka. Then those monies are very, by considering those monies, the Sri Lanka airline is very valuable. They are doing very valuable part to the country. Then you are thinking about that small institute only by using a loss and profit. Another one is you get you told subsidies for the electricity and fuel because of the now those days they gave subsidies, but after releasing that one, what happened? Inflation increased and production sector lost. Now they gave up. Think about like company MS, they are going to Bangladesh like countries. They all the companies secretly.
Excuse me, sir,
Yeah.
I don't want to sound
Yeah.
like a dictator.
No, yeah.
But
I
can
am
you please get
asking.
to your question?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of other people waiting to ask
Yeah,
questions.
yeah, I am asking, why don't you think like that broad view?
So let me answer you in a couple of ways. Now you raised the example of Sri Lankan Airlines and its landing rights. Do you know how many times we fly to London a day? Do you know how many times Emirates flies to London every day? So no. So the point I'm making is you were saying that we have very valuable landing rights, right? But so do every other airline in the world. I mean, Emirates flies into Heathrow 8 or 9 times every day, right? Sri Lankan flies once a day. So this story about the landing rights is a old story. The global aviation industry is liberalizing at a very fast pace, right? And this is another fallacy that we have been told that these landing rights are so valuable. That landing rights are certainly valuable, but and the landing rights are with the country actually and not with the airline. So that is one side of the story, right? Now, in terms of how important the airline is for Sri Lanka, I will give you a completely different example. We can't survive without fuel, right? As a nation, right? But fuel is shipped into Sri Lanka from different parts of the world. Do we own a shipping line? We don't. Okay. So if we are thinking from a tourism perspective, the need for an airline you need an airline to bring tourists into the country. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a national airline or that it has to be owned by the government of Sri Lanka. Right? We can open up our skies. And we can tell any airline that wants to come into the country to come and fly from here to wherever it wants, right? And that will probably bring even more tourists than trying to limit it to Sri Lankan Airlines. So that is number two. In terms of the subsidies, you were speaking of the fuel and the electricity subsidies. I say, my point is this: if a government wants to give a subsidy, it has every right to give a subsidy. But you don't need to own a business to pass a subsidy on to citizens. There are many ways in which it can be done. You don't need to own the business to do that. Right? So that is the difference. Now, LIOC, which is not a government controlled company, nor is it a Sri Lankan company, also provided citizens with subsidized fuel. So government has plenty of tools at its disposal to get commercial enterprises to do what it wants. It doesn't need to own a business to do that.
Mr. Shah.
Yeah, can we go to the next person, please?
Mr. Shah,
Okay, now I think we went through that, and I think that explanation should suffice for the time being, because there's a gentleman waiting for a long time. Please.
yeah, Mr. Shah, thank you very much for the opportunity. As you said, many things about Sri Lanka Telecom. I am just leveling this question. SLT actually SLT is not the state-owned enterprises, but it has state share. Plus, the idea came from 2020 budget from the president that the divestiture to be happen just to increase the rupee value and the increase the foreign revenues. So then the this entire process was restructuring committee will start that. Then what is the current status of this entire divestiture process? And almost three companies, three bidders you received, and one was rejected, and they have again a court case. Then two was selected, but as we feel that there should be many companies that for the interest of SLT and the telecom industry, but only three companies, that was questionable. But anyway, what is the current status, and how do you proceed from here with the RFP, and when it is floated, and how long it will take, and the employee benefit, how do you safeguard from the RFP, and whether the current employee benefit, or will you add minimum benefit that are incorporated to RFP, and just brief about this entire process here onwards.
So Manjula, like you know, there was a EOI, and now the EOI, there were two parties that were shortlisted. They have to be moved into the RFP phase, and we have to open up the data rooms for them to be able to do their due diligence. But we moved a little bit slowly on that because, like you, as you're aware, there were issues surrounding the spectrum imbalance amongst the telco sector, right? And we wanted that imbalance resolved before we moved into the RFP phase. As you are now aware, that spectrum imbalance has been resolved today. So now we can move forward into the RFP phase. We can sign the NDAs with the two parties. Of course, we have to wait until the court case gets resolved as well. That was heard today. I think it's going to be called again on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I have heard. And so once that is also completed, then we can move forward with the RFP phase, and hopefully we'll conclude that.
How about the employee benefits? The current benefits are being enjoyed, or it is? Can you say something about the because the employees are concerned about any organization with the divestiture? Then how do you handle this with the RFP?
So I'm now not talking as head of the SOE unit. Now I'm putting on my private sector hat, right? I think employees need to be concerned if under two circumstances. One is if they feel that there is overstaffing in the organization, they need to be obviously concerned. And if they feel that the perks and the remuneration that they are getting is way above market, then they have to be concerned. But if that is not the case, I don't think there needs to be a concern at all. That is number one. Number two, the Sri Lankan law is also such that a company can't simply, tomorrow morning fire even one employee. Sri Lankan law simply doesn't allow that. The only way you can right size an entity in the event an entity has too many people is through a voluntary retirement scheme. And that voluntary retirement scheme has to be agreed between the employees and the company. So I think there are plenty of safeguards around this, and I don't think we need to be worried about issues of this nature. But I think principally, Manjula, do you think SLT is overstaffed? If it is not, then you don't have a challenge.
Yes, my name is Gunaratna. Thing is, our country name is Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. We want to maintain democracy and the social, both. Then after 1970, drastically increased the number of ministries and the state ministers. Everybody want to do what they want. Then without thinking about these policies, right? Then they want to do this as they like. Then they don't think about the value engineering or cost benefit analysis or nothing. They do what they want. Then as a result of it, corruption increased drastically. Ministries increase because to maintain the coalition government, they increase the ministries. That is one of the major failure. Even you do this, give this so many valuable ideas, they cannot implement. That is the main root cause to find out. The other thing is take CB. CB is a Ceylon Electricity Board. Board is board, corporation, enterprises, emporium. So many names are there. In the name of us, board is service oriented, not profitable profits. CTB, Ceylon Transport Board, only one time got the profit during the Anil Munasinghe was the minister. Then these are the things. One by one, each enterprises, each organization, we have to analyze properly. Therefore, for an example, what I am saying is Ceylon Electricity Board must convert as the Ceylon Electricity Authority. Then it can get private sector joint ventures. So many things can do. Under this framework, Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka and the increase in ministries, we cannot overcome this situation. Even though you learn people propose many things, but nothing can be implemented.
Okay, I don't know whether the speakers want to respond to that because I didn't see any question in that. Just a statement. Yeah, so, yeah, that's right. Your point is taken. Ms. Sharia.
My question goes to Dr. Kumaraswamy regarding this inflation. You said during the couple of 14 months, inflation came from 70 to 6%. But the prices of goods and services went up in 2022. It remain as it is. We don't feel it. It's not the ground reality. Anything wrong with the calculations or?
See, what inflation does is it measures the increase in prices, right? So you have two concepts. One is the price level, and the other is inflation, which is the rate of increase in price. So when inflation comes down from 70% to 6%, what that means is that the rate of increase in prices has reduced from 70% per year to 6% per year. But the price level hasn't come down. It's going up all the time. But it's going up at 6% rather than 70%. But deflation is not a good thing either. Because if you're having deflation, then economic activity kind of grinds to a halt because people don't sell things. People don't buy things because they're waiting for the prices to come down. So there's no demand in the system. And, the economy kind of crunches to a halt. But what inflation does, it measures the delta, the increase. So though it has come down to 6%, all it means is that the rate of increase is coming to 6 rather than 7. The level doesn't come down, it's going up.
This is something that has been put into our heads, that cost of living comes down. Cost of living fundamentally can't come down. Cost of living keeps going up on a regular basis. What you can control is the extent to which it goes up. And that's how you measure the inflation. I'm giving you a very layman's answer here. So the real focus needs to be on income generation for the citizens. You create the jobs, you create the opportunities for people to earn the right kind of income so that they can meet the cost of living. If you think that cost of living can be brought down and that's where government should focus on, that is not something which is possible. So these are the cons that we have been told, unfortunately, and people tend to believe these things. and it's just not the way to go.
I think it's important in Sri Lanka, we keep saying the cost of living is too high, cost of living is too high. In my view, the bigger problem is we have very low productivity, which means our incomes are. So the way to solve this problem is to increase productivity so that we can increase income. Because if we increase incomes without increasing productivity, you get inflation, right? You have more money chasing the same amount of or less, it's not enough good. So you have to increase productivity, and with that, increase incomes as well. Then our incomes will be high enough to absorb international prices. We don't have to subsidize electricity. We don't have to subsidize fuel. We don't have to subsidize fertilizer because our incomes are high enough to absorb the international price. But now our incomes are not high enough because our productivity is. So the key thing is to get productivity up.
Mr. Suresh? My question is, as the regulator, do you think that TRPSL acted fairly in the past? Thank you.
So, yeah, so I'm not a telecom expert, so I don't know. But from what I can gather from speaking to the operators now, is that they see a positive change in the TRCSL, right? Having said that, I mean, thanks to the work that I'm doing on the divestitures, we have the TRCSL, the insurance regulator, and PUCSL, and so on and so forth. I think we need to relook at the entire regulatory framework, bring them up to good global standards, and I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done. So I won't point a finger at any one of them, but I think the entire regulatory mechanism needs to be looked at. That I think I can confidently say.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah. My question to Suresh, because your scope is to restructure SOEs. My question is, will it enough restructuring SOE, because finally all comes under different ministries in the government, because there are many government institutions headed by incapable people. In the treasury, I can say example, National Planning Department. They are the people who make policies regarding the large scale projects, but the people handling are very much incapable. So do you think that only restructuring SOE works and does it require the restructuring of the government or the government institution, like the many organization under treasury, maybe under ministry?
So it's a difficult challenge, and there is merit in what you're saying. So this is one of the reasons I think why some of these enterprises should be put into private hands, because then the private sector will take care of the restructuring by themselves, right? Having said that, the holding company mechanism that we are talking about, where we have the right boards appointed, both for the holding company as well as the individual subsidiaries, the right policies are put in place, the right operational flexibility, space to operate, all that is given. I think if that model is allowed to function the way it is thought through at this moment in time, I think those enterprises that remain within government, I think they can be efficiently run. But of course, the space has to be given to the entities, to the holding company, for example, to do the work as is envisaged at the moment. I think critical is getting the right boards appointed. Performance management systems are critical. Getting the right people into these enterprises is critical. So lots of these things, we've thought through a lot of the things that need to be done. And if they can be implemented the way that we have thought through, I think there is a good chance.
Okay, thank you.
Your basic point is right. SOE reform is important. So is public administration. So you need to do both. I think I heard Mangala say, they're introducing KPIs for SOE, but also for IRD, customs and all. They are now introducing KPIs and things. So that's the direction we need to go, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
My question, Mr. Shah, now, as per my understanding, we are expecting a lot of investors from the external parties, maybe from foreigners. So you said that we will secure the employment, present employment. What about the future? Because these companies can bring employees from their country to our country, or is there any guarantee to recruit employees from the Sri Lanka in future if they brought our companies to them?
So again, I'm putting on my private sector hat. I don't think companies, bring lots of people from outside into Sri Lanka. So if there are plenty of multinationals operating in Sri Lanka at the moment, these are all household names. There is Unilever, there is Nestle, there is Ceylon Tobacco, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, Citibank, whatever. But except for maybe one or two, right? The vast majority of people in these enterprises are all Sri Lankan. So I don't think that is a major issue that we need to worry about. And let me also say, now that this employment issue, you brought it up and Manjula brought it up, let me address this way. I'll give you an example. If a lift that is capable of carrying 10 people, okay, if 15 people get into the lift, right, what will happen? The lift will crash and all 15 will die. Not just the 5 additional people who got into the lift, right? So the moment you put the 5 additional people, you're putting at risk the 10 people who could very easily have gone in that lift. This is exactly the same thing with an organization. If an organization can have 100 people and you put 125 into the organization, you're putting at risk not just the 25, but you're putting at risk the whole, the 100 as well. The 100 who could have very well been absorbed into the organization, who could have been productive in the organization, you're putting them at risk as well. So these are the mindsets that we need to change. We have a massive problem in terms of employment. We are not creating sufficient employment opportunities within this economy. That is what we need to address. We need to address that point, right? But we can't. The solution is not to keep an overstaffed company overstaffed. The solution is to create the employment opportunities that can absorb those people from the overstaffed companies into other enterprises.
Factor market reforms, labor reforms, etc. So, in the whole gamut of reform, employee reforms is only one aspect of that. So, unless we address the whole issue, the economy cannot get out of this mess. That's where we are now. So, factor market reform will enable efficient deployment of labor and creation of employment. It is not that. It is highly rule-based control. Like you said, when a company cannot get rid of one person, a very protracted process. So even if you privatize any company today, I was in the public company and then got privatized, none were retrained. They all continue. But the strategy was to increase revenue and make the organization. So if there is a redundancy, that can be done only through a VRS or whatever it is. So I don't see a problem if we go through the entire reform process, then this problem will resolve. But if we stop halfway, with whatever political or other reason, then of course you are again back in the mess.
But if I can try and address what you were saying.
And just to add to that, this is already happening, at least in the unskilled category. Like, for a long time, at least for the last 10 years, in the projects that CB has undertaken, especially in transmission line construction and so on, I mean, they bring laborers from India, China. For a long time, I was in charge of transmission projects. I used to sign many letters to the immigration asking for batches of 40, 50 Indians to come and work here. And they do that. So, I mean, that is because, you know, the local contractors can't find enough people to do this type of work. Because our people prefer to, you know, go to a three-wheel park and stay there for the whole day. Right? You know, these are all able-bodied people, but they want to, you know, get into this kind of work, unfortunately. So they bring, and of course, you know, they find that it's even cheaper in the sense, because when the Indians come, you know, they are put in a camp, you know, where the transmission, you know, construction sites are, and they work throughout the day. I mean, of course, they are fed and all that. It is still cheaper because, you know, our people are not the most efficient people, even if they find the work, unfortunately. But so this is already happening. So if it happens with the skill category, so be it.
The crucial point is you have to go to immigration and get approval to bring them. So people can't just buy an enterprise and bring people in. You have no option but to allow.
So on the, I think Susanta's point on the construction sector, this has been happening. But if you think of it at the skill level, will a multinational organization bring in a lot of staff from overseas into Sri Lanka? It is extremely unlikely because the costs are very high. You know, they have to be given accommodation, they have to be given transport, food, you know, the costs are extremely high. And then it's not profitable for the entity to do that. And they will also need to do that only if they can't find the right talent within Sri Lanka itself. So, yeah.
If the skills are available in Sri Lanka, then they don't give.
So we have time for one more question from, I know there are 3 or 4 people. If you make it very short, you know, without going to a lot of details and making statements, just get to the question. I think we can still accommodate all 3 of you, because we have to finish by 8 o'clock according to the organizers here. And we also may have some questions from the online audience. So we have to accommodate at least a few of those. So be very short and get to the question quickly.
Yeah, so I'm in the legal profession, legal field by profession, and I have a question for Mr. Shah. So I believe many of the gentlemen here were quite vocal about their concerns about privatizing all state-owned enterprises. And I was just wondering whether there would be a mechanism by, I may appear to be quite ignorant by asking this question, and I excuse myself for that. I'd like to question Mr. Shah whether there would be any mechanism by which a public-private partnership could be established with private organizations in order to provide the service which the state-owned enterprises are currently providing in collaboration with such private companies, so that the income from giving such service could be pumped directly into the government without entirely privatizing all state-owned enterprises.
So there are some enterprises where public-private partnerships are being looked at. There is another agency that looks at private-public partnership. So instances where government feels it needs to have control over an entity, then those are being looked at as PPPs. An example might be if you're doing some work with, say, minerals, for example, a natural resource. Now, those may go as private-public partnerships. So, and that is being handled by a completely different unit.
And also I have a small extension for the question. To establish such a private-public partnership, would any approval be required from the Treasury or any line ministry or any other organization within the government?
So there again, there is a PPP law that is coming into effect. And I think you may need to wait until that law comes into force to see what the process of that is.
Of course, Mr. Shah. Thank you very much.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah, my question is with respect to divesting the infrastructure, critical infrastructure, like if you take CPC, Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, now there are tank farms like Muthurajavela and, Colonna and so on. So, when it goes to countries like maybe China, India, and so on, right, where we have certain, geopolitical matters. So it might be a problem in my opinion, certain critical infrastructure like tank farms and so on, as well as you said, the telecom, even telecom, not the data security, but might be critical infrastructure may be a problem if it goes to certain parties with certain countries which we are not in favorable situation. So that's the question I have.
Honestly, I'm at a little bit of a loss to, these are commercial businesses. You are asking commercial investors to come. Their overall objective is revenues and profitability, and mixing this with geopolitics. We are not looking at geopolitical scenarios. That is way beyond our pay grade. We are looking at this from a very commercial and economic perspective. It is really at cabinet level that they need to take a call on whether there are, national security issues, geopolitical issues, etc. involved. We don't have the capability to look at that. Having said that, you speak about a tank farm, right? The real issue, for example, in the supply of fuel is we have very, very little control over the source of fuel, right? Over the transport of fuel from the source country to its harbor, and from the harbor of the source country to our country. We have no control over that supply chain whatsoever, right? But we are concerned about the security of the fuel when it lands in Sri Lanka. Now, if you really want to establish, if you're really concerned about the security, let's say, of the supply of fuel, you need to be able to control the entire supply chain. And that is simply not possible. So, this story about the security and all that, I don't know, to my mind, it is, it's not as complicated as it sounds. I don't know, I may not have answered you properly. Again, government has a lot of power. It has the ability to legislate, the ability to regulate, the ability to incentivize. And government has so many mechanisms it can use in the event it feels that, say, certain critical infrastructure is being, let's say, misused. So personally, I don't know, I may be very wrong, but I don't have that same concern that for what you're expressing, for instance. I don't know, Indrajit.
This is where regulation is very important. In those areas, it could be areas where there's a natural monopoly, or it could be areas where you have sensitivity in terms of the criticality of the infrastructure. The regulator has to be very strong and be able to take action to prevent abuse in those areas. As Suresh said, the state has tremendous powers, and through its regulator, it can make sure that any kind of abuse is stopped. That's possible. Do that in other countries, they do. But we are living in a world where these issues are becoming more and more important. I know I spent a lot of time in Britain. The British government stopped Huawei. They were going to do a deal with Huawei for their fifth generation. And they changed the decision simply because of pressure from America. So these things are happening now, it's true, and geopolitics is going to be a more significant factor going forward, because these tensions are getting elevated. But within Sri Lanka, we need to have a very strong regulator who makes sure there is no abuse that affect us adverse.
Last question.
With regard to the SOE restructuring, just want to ask, is there a particular plan to restructure the, what do you call, the loss-making entities first and then restructure the profit-making ones, or is it just collected and using a different way?
Yeah, so like I explained earlier, the decision about divestiture is not based on whether it's loss-making or profit-making. Because it's, the simple reality is that a loss-making entity can be transformed into a profit-making entity. And with bad management, a profit-making entity can also become a loss-making entity. So this profit-making, loss-making is not the basis on which divestiture is a divestiture is not decided on that basis. So what we are looking at is to see whether there is a market failure, right? If there is a market failure, then there is a need for government intervention. But as long as there is no market failure, government doesn't need to be in commercial business. So any one of those enterprises then can be divested. Yeah.
Okay, there are lots of questions on the web, but I don't think we have time to go into each of those. I looked at a few, none of them were clear to me, so I don't know. I'm not in the position to explain what it is. I have a last. It's not a question, a few comments. I think some of these issues were already addressed by the two speakers. Now, like I said, one of the long-running allegations that we have with this divesting public entities is, selling cheap, right? You sold, this industry for a song, and far less than what it is worth. I don't know how to determine that. So, and also I think you talked about taxation, right? Which is correct, but unfortunately, we are very weak in tax collection. So unless that is improved, taxing itself might not. Conceptually, it's good, but practically, we know the problems that we already have with not only with people who are not paying taxes, but even in collecting taxes from people who are willing to pay, right? So that's one comment I have, and also this issue of national security. Of course, I think that already addressed, because this is also a very popular thing, when you say this is something to do with national security, right? Now, since I work in the electricity industry, I know, there have been a lot of talk about national security from time to time, even from within the engineers themselves. The best example is the Norwich coal plant, right? It provides almost 1/3 or more of our electricity requirement. So they say that sacrosanct, you can't touch it, it's a nationally, national asset, or something that has a lot to do with national security, or at least the security of the electricity supply. But that is a myth. Many people do not realize that, from its inception in 2011, there have been Chinese people working right throughout on the contract. Every 2 years or so, the CD would renew the contract and pay so many $1 million. And then there were some questions, because I was personally involved. Because of that, I know somewhere in 2021, there were questions as to whether this contract should be renewed. So I went with the then general manager and the person in charge of the generation division, and had a discussion with all the engineers of the Norwich power plant. You know what they said? They said, no, we can't do it without Chinese. The reason is that they say one thing, they can't even identify some of the spare parts because it's all in Chinese, and whose fault is that? And they can't even source the spare parts from the Chinese company because only these Chinese people can talk to them. So they had this, building in the middle of this Norwich site exclusively for the Chinese staff. I mean, they started with some 300, but now it has come down to, I don't know, 22 or something. I don't know. General manager should be able to give the latest figure, because every time, they renew the contract, they reduced some of the stuff, including 2 translators, right? Live permanently there. So you talk about national security. So if you accept that you can't run the plant without the Chinese, the moment, the Chinese say, no, we are not doing anything, the plant will shut down. Simple as that. So I think we sometimes we talk about national security, without knowing what exactly that means, right? I mean, it's a very popular and very, attractive thing. If you want to disrupt something, you talk about national security, right? I mean, the same thing happened when, of course, that was a controversial thing, when we were negotiating with this, New Fortress company about LNG supply. To me, that was one of the best deals that you could ever come up with, right? Because this is one thing, the only proposal that was based on US Henry Hub prices, right? You can never get a deal like that, right? But then, there are lots of, so much misinformation, and then again, they came up with this issue of national security, right? Because it's the LNG supply, which is going to supply maybe 2,000 megawatts of, capacity in the country. It's going to be in the hands of the Americans, and they will control the supply. Even the, politicians are saying that. That never happens, because they are going to be international contracts, they don't just come and, connect the LNG supply. So these are internationally enforceable contracts. We have so many power purchase contracts signed with, foreign companies, investors. They are working beautifully, right? And so I mean, this whole concept of national security is misunderstood and misinterpreted, in my opinion.
Best way to minimize these issues related to external influence of our affairs is for us to manage our affairs well. If we run our affairs well, if we don't have to, if we don't have to go to restructure our debt, or we have to have a civil conflict, all kinds of stuff, it gives an opportunity for other people to come and interfere in our business. But if you run a stable economy, a stable polity, the chances of others coming in, or at least the pretext for others to come and interfere in our business is much better. So the best thing we can do, if you read the IMF's governance diagnostic, you feel ashamed that our country has got this. I mean, it is a shameful document. So as long as we manage our affairs like this, we leave ourselves open. We are vulnerable. That's something I think all of us as Sri Lankans need to work at putting right. And it's not just the politician. Not just the politician.
Precisely.
It's all of us.
And I think one last comment. One area that we are very weak is the regulation. I think both of you addressed that issue. Even electricity regulation, telecommunication, because in the absence of proper regulation or very robust kind of regulation, none of these things will work. That has already happened. Even the few industries that have gone under regulation, they are not worked. Like
that's a problem.
I think that is a very valid point, and that is an area where professional bodies could even collectively kind of campaign for this reform in the regulatory spectrum, so that issues like the spectrum issue that was raised and various other electricity and other area, those matters come. Today, sometimes some of the SOEs are the landlord, regulator, and the operator. So there is conflict of interest.
Yes.
You can't then have a level playing field. So how to resolve this matter? I think can be done.
Yeah, even electricity was for a long time like that, right? I mean, 2009 they brought, of course, 2002 they passed the act, but unfortunately it never materialized.
Still,
yeah, CPC still. But for whatever 2009 act was passed, which is not the best, but yeah, but regulator is unfortunately worked for a few years, but then now it is back to square one basically. Okay, so we'll wind up, and I think there's a vote of thanks. But anyway, for me, I have to thank Dr. Kumaraswamy for taking the time to attend this event and, giving a very valuable presentation. And also my friend Suresh explaining a lot of things, but I think there will be a formal vote of thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think with the interest of time only, we have to conclude the session. So as I discussed with President, Electrical, Electronic and Telecommunication Engineering Sectional Committee is the highest subject restructured sectional committee in ISL. That is one of the reasons for us to bring these discussions for you. I think it will be benefited for all of us. I think you all had a very productive 3 hours session with this eminent panel, and we had a very esteemed audience as well. So on behalf of the Electrical, Electronic and Telecommunication Engineering Sectional Committee, I should thank our panelists today. So in order to give away a token of appreciation, I should invite the President, ISL, Engineer Professor Ranjit Disanayake, to join with me. We should give our thanks to Dr. EE&TESC Kumaraswamy. Thank you very much, sir. I will accept our invitation. Mr. Suresh Shah, thank you very much. And Dr. Susanta Pereira for moderating this valuable session. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Engineer Professor Ranjit Disanayake, President of ISL. In order to give the final remarks, I invite Engineer Chamil Edurmani, one of our past chairman in sectional committee.
Thank you, Engineer Sushanta Panyarachi, who is the chairman of the Electrical, Electronic and Telecommunication Sectional Committee. Today was the topic was restructuring state-owned enterprises. Is the government divesting? So, on behalf of the Electrical, Electronic and Telecommunication Sectional Committee, I must again thank Dr. EE&TESC Kumaraswamy, who was a former governor of the central bank. Thank you, sir, for coming and accepting our invitation and giving so much knowledge about the divestiture and also the economy of the country. Thank you very much. And Mr. Suresh Shah, the head of SOE Restructuring Unit. Thank you very much, sir, for coming here. And he's doing the practical part of the SOE restructuring. Why not we invite him as ISL? And actually the concerns and matters that you have raised, I think best has been answered by Mr. Suresh Shah and also Dr. EE&TESC Kumaraswamy. And let me thank Dr. Susanta Pereira, former Additional General Manager and former Additional Secretary of Ministry of Energy. Thank you, sir, for moderating this event in a successful manner. And I must thank Professor Ranjit Disanayake, the President of the ISL, who was behind the sectional committee from the inception of this session. Actually, he was instrumental in organizing this into a success. And let me thank the special invitees, including Dr. Narendra De Silva, who is the Acting General Manager of Chilean Electricity Board. Thank you, sir, for coming and taking your time for the participating on this event. And past presidents, council members, past council members, and the participants who have participated both in physical and also online. Thank you very much for your attendance and also asking so much questions, which actually pertinent to our organizations, our fields, and so much on that. I would really thank you on asking so much questions and getting the knowledge. And then Chief Executive Officer of IESL and his staff. Without them, we could not have done this into this level. 3 hours of session. Actually, it was pre-planned by us, and then it was materialized by the staff of the IESL. Thank you very much for that. Let me end my vote of thanks by inviting you to the fellowship and the dinner which has been arranged in the members' lounge. And thank you very much and good night. So we will see you on the members' lounge. Thank you very much.